Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers, dear brothers and sisters. Thank you very much for joining the program Thaqalain Talks, presented to you by Noor Online Islamic Center. I am Atta, the host of this program. Throughout this holy month of Ramadan, over 31 nights, Noor Online Islamic Center will present to you different programs related to the holy month of Ramadan, Islamic lifestyle, the Holy Quran, and the Ahlul Bayt. For today's episode, we have invited Shaykh Rohani. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh. Welcome to the show.
Alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me in this program.
May Allah accept the prayers and the du'as and supplications of all dear brothers and sisters, Muslims, on Layali al-Ghadr, especially tonight, which is the 23rd night of the holy month of Ramadan, which is believed to be the most authentic one among the Layali al-Ghadr. Do not forget us in your du'as and prayers and supplications. Shaykh, for today's episode, we want to talk about the important topic of du'a or supplication. Before getting to different types, place and time of du'a, let's be a little bit concerned with the definition of du'a. What is exactly du'a?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Dua or supplication means to ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So asking forgiveness, asking everything that it is halal and it is permissible in Islam to ask these sort of things from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is called dua, which comes from the root of da'wah, or which means asking, which means inviting sometimes. So that's why whatever we ask from our Lord, from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that is termed as dua technically in our, let's say, religious texts. And of course, it is a way by which we can communicate or contact Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is a way that we gain the status of proximity to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And of course, dua is the best means for a mu'min and Muslim to improve himself or herself, to perfect himself, and to actually enable himself to tolerate better the challenges of life, the hardships, the difficulties.
That's right.
And of course, and to feel that always he is in the presence of his Lord, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that
right.
will protect him from all the bad things and evil and wrong deeds.
Okay. In Surah Qafir, ayah 60, we read, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَقَالَ رَبُّكُمُ ادْعُونِي أَسْتَجِبْ لَكُمْ. In English it means, your Lord has said, call me and I will hear you. Does this reference to the Holy Quran and these, the ayahs and the verses like these show us that dua is a Quranic concept, Shaykh?
Exactly. You know, even salah, that we pray 5 times a day. Salah, firstly, it meant, before Islam, it meant dua.
Okay.
Salah means dua, it's a kind of supplication.
Yes.
Even though prayer is prayer, when you translate it as a prayer, it means dua. That is why, of course, dua is, of course, a kind of Quranic concept that is referred to by the Holy Quran, as well as the narrations and the hadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salatu was-salam. It is like, it's a kind of divine commandment,
Yes.
divine order.
Okay.
The Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that wherever you are in need, you have to ask me, not to refer to anyone else
Yes.
other than me, because I am the provider, I am the sustainer, you know. That is why the best kind of action that a mu'min can perform is to be always in contact with his Lord, through dua,
That's right.
asking and remembering and reminding himself of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So we can say that dua or supplication is a bridge between that's right, the created ones and the creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So, and as you said, salat itself is a kind of worshipping. Can we say that dua is a type of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or no?
You know, worship means to praise, to what we can say appreciate, for example, someone. That is a kind of worship, but when you pray again, of course, first you should appreciate Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. First you should do hamd and thana and let's say praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then you ask something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Based on this concept, of course, it is a kind of worship because it keeps you always in contact with your Lord.
Very good.
So the more you are in contact with your Lord, the more you are pious, the
That's
more
right.
you are mu'min, the more you are, let's say, strong, you know. And from the Quranic perspective, you know, in ayat of the Holy Quran, it is said that إِنَّ الْإِنسَانَ لَيَطْغَى أَنْ رَآهُ اسْتَغْنَى.
Yes.
Whenever you feel self-sufficient in the presence of your Lord, of course, then you will commit sins.
Okay.
Then you become sinner, then you become criminal. That is highly possible for you to become criminal if you feel that you're self-sufficient.
Yes.
And you do not need to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Dua actually is a very good cure, a very good heal for this kind of self-sufficiency, for this kind of arrogance that someone might have.
That's right.
Because when you beg Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiveness,
Yes.
you actually, first of all, you understand that you're nothing in the presence of your Lord. Everything is Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And you have to remind yourself from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
Yes.
from His power,
Yes.
that He is the provider, He is the sustainer, He is the Razzaq.
Yes.
And that is why you feel that you are nothing. Everything is your Lord.
Yes.
That will help you not to feel self-sufficient, and then it will protect you from the crimes, from
Yes.
committing crimes and committing
Okay.
sins. That is the best thing
Very
that a
good.
mu'min can perform.
Yes. Again, I would like to refer to an ayah from the Holy Quran, Surah Baqarah, ayah 186, which says that Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, وَإِذَا سَأَلَكَ عِبَادِي عَنِّي فَإِنِّي غَرِيبٌ أُجِيبُ دَعْوَةَ الدَّاعِ إِذَا دَعَانِ, which means in English that, "Oh, my servants, when my servants ask you about me, tell them that I am indeed nearmost, and I answer the supplicant's call when he calls me." So the supplicants and calling with the person directly refers to the concept of dua. So all in all, the Holy Quran proves that dua is a way to get closer or to find qurbatan ilallah, proximity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But some people might ask that, are there any special etiquettes for supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Any adab? Because we have adab al-salat, we have adab al-sawm. Do we have any adab al-dua, Shaykh?
Yes, of course. First of all, our brothers and sisters should know that when we ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then our tongue should be completely in line with our heart.
Very good.
The thing that we ask from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it should be like something wholeheartedly.
Yes.
And then kamal al-inqita'i ila Allah ta'ala. Dua should be in the status that you feel that no one else can help you in this respect. The only one who can help you is Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like for example, when you have someone is sick, for example, in the hospital, and all the doctors tell you that they can do nothing for you, for example, that sick person. Yeah?
Very good.
So then there's nothing to help you.
Yes.
Here is kamal al-inqita. Then here you actually forget about anyone else,
Yes.
any other source.
You
and
cut off
just
yourself from anything but Allah
Exactly.
subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Just you refer to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Very good.
Here your dua is the real dua, because the heart is in line with your tongue, and tongue is in line with your heart. And of course, when you ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there should be a status of khushu and khudu'.
Very good. Humbleness.
Humbleness, and you
Yes.
should be God, let's
Fearful,
say,
God-fearing, yes.
fearing, yeah, exactly. You should remember and remind yourself of this fact that you are in the presence of the Almighty.
Very good.
Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
So you have to be in the highest level of
Yes.
humbleness, humility, in the presence of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it requires the good, or let's say the perfect knowledge about Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Prior to any kind of dua, you should acknowledge that what your Lord is, what is God, and what are
Yes.
some of the main attributes of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are some things that prior to make any dua we have to
Yes.
fulfill, and also amal salih,
Yes.
the good deeds is also the conditions, and istighfar, asking forgiveness, and also ask or praying for the others. This is
Yes.
very much required
Yes.
and very much, let's say, recommended in Islam, that
Yes.
when you ask from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala something, you have to give priority to the others.
Very good.
Not for your own self,
Yes.
rather for the others, for neighbors, your children, your families, your relatives. Ask for them.
In fact, you do dua for them and they do dua
Exactly,
for
yes.
you.
And then
Yes.
either the people will ask something
Yes.
from Almighty Allah for you, or
Yes.
the angels will pray for you.
Very much recalls me of the
Yes.
story of Moses, that oh Allah, how should I do dua? And said that let others do dua or supplicate for you. And Prophet Moses asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the reasons. And he says that because they did not commit sin with your tongue, okay?
Exactly.
So they will ask for forgiveness for you from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is great. And how beautiful, Shaykh, it is when we do dua when we are not having any problem. I mean, usually the people go to dua and supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when they face a difficulty. At the easy time and the comfortable time, when you are happy, full of pleasure, living our life in a cozy place, we forget about doing dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But when the problems and the afflictions come, gradually we remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Of course, Allah is Arhamar Rahimin, but He has merciful, He is beneficent, but all in all, it's very much better to keep Allah in your mind and memory at both times, the times of happiness and the times of afflictions. That's all right. Are there any recommended place or time for doing dua in Islam?
First of all, dua, wherever you are,
Okay.
whenever you are, you can ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّهُ أَقْرَبُ إِلَيْكَ مِنْ حَبْلِ الْوَرِيدِ.
Very good.
So that is why what matters most to all of us is that we should know that we are always completely dependent
Yes.
on Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this dependency requires that we should always pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But of course, according to riwayat, the traditions narrated from the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, there are recommended places and there are recommended times in which if we pray to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the possibility of being answered our dua is more.
Yes.
Like what, for example, during these nights, the great nights of Qadr.
Yes.
The best nights for dua is nights of Qadr.
Yes.
Nights of the holy month of Ramadan, or during the days of the holy month of Ramadan. The 15th of Sha'ban,
Yes.
al-Mu'adham, is the best time. 27th of Rajab,
Yes.
Eid al-Fitr.
Eid al-Fitr is also close to us. Yes.
The day of Arafah. The second Eid, the Eid al-Qurban, or the sacrifice
Eid
Eid.
al-Adha.
Eid al-Adha, yes.
That's right.
And also the first day of the holy month of Muharram.
Yes.
These times or these specific days are mentioned in the riwayat that they are very good times for
Very
dua. And also during the daytime and night times, we can say that Sahar,
Yes.
dawn,
Yes.
is the best time to make dua. Or when you hear the voice of Adhan,
Yes.
at the time of Adhan,
Very
either in the morning and at noon or in the evening,
Mm-hmm.
and also on Friday night.
Very good.
It's a very good time to make dua. And one of the best times that we can make dua is when there's raining.
Aha.
Yeah, under the raining.
This
if
is
you
also
ask dua,
recommended,
yes,
yes.
it is also recommended.
Very good.
The best place, according to riwayat, that you can make dua is the holy shrine of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein,
Very good.
تحت القبة, in the very much close and near to the Darih of Abu Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salatu wasalam. That is the best place that you can make dua. And also when you see the holy Kaaba, Masjid al-Haram, if you go for
Yes.
Hajj, the moment that you see
Okay.
the holy Kaaba, try to make dua. These are the very good,
Very
let's
good.
say, time and places.
So all in all, the holy shrines and the Muslims of the holy
Exactly.
imams, or the holy
Yes,
Kaaba,
yes.
the mosque, the masajid, these are the best places that we can do dua. And as you said, the state of dua must be with humbleness, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Araf, ayah 55, says that, supplicate to your Lord beseechingly and secretly. Indeed, Allah does not like the transgressors. Do not like do the dua as you are showing off, or you are boasting, or you have ujb, or we can say this kind of sense of arrogance in yourself. Do the dua in a humble way before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's all right. These are really beautiful concepts. You named Laylatul Qadr and doing supplication to Allah during these nights. Now one important question comes to my mind, because during the other nights the experts talked about the importance of Laylatul Qadr and how we supplicate to Allah, and somehow the predestination and the destiny of people are going to be predestined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Isn't doing dua in contradiction with the concept of predestination, Shaykh?
Predestination does not mean that everything is predestined, that you have no role in all the things that occurs in your life. If that is the case, then what is then Qiyamah? What is then the Day of Judgment? What is then the reward? Jannah, Jahannam?
Yes.
What are these orders of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that laysa lil insani illa ma sa'a? Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that you have to be istaqamu, you have to be all, let's say,
Steadfast. Yes.
In all these, for example, performance that you do. All these concepts that we have in the ayat of the Holy Quran, it tells us that, of course, predestination means that, yes, for example, something is going to happen to you in the next, for example, year.
Yes.
And now the question is that all these du'as that now you make, all these du'a that you perform now for the next year,
Yes.
so this du'a will be also included among the main causes of those things that will happen, you know?
Okay.
Because in the nature in this world, everything is like kind of, there's a causal relationship or
Right.
causation
Yes.
between all the things that happens in our life and for us. So that is why among the causes
Yes.
that predestine something for us is this dua. So that's why we have to be always, let's say, careful and cautious about what we want from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what we do,
Yes.
because our actions, our deeds, our du'as, all these things that we do, it has its own impacts on our future.
Yes.
So that's why dua has a very good role
Yes.
for us.
Yes.
For example, it is in ilmullah ta'ala, in the knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is for example, predestined that those, for example, good things will happen for you in the next year or next days
Yes.
or in your life. So it is like this, that based on all these good actions, all these, for example, virtues, fada'ils, du'as, prayers, you know, all these things together are like cause, and that good thing that will happen in the future for you, that's like effect.
Yes.
So there's a kind of causal relationship between that effect and this cause, but this cause includes this du'a, these
Yes.
good deeds.
Okay.
So that's why our du'as, our good deeds, our actions has its own positive impact
Yes.
on our future.
That's right.
We should not forget that, for example, if these nights we make good du'as,
Okay.
it will absolutely have good impacts
Yes.
in our future. If we forget about these things, of course, we cannot, let's say, ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa
Yes.
ta'ala, or we cannot expect Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that good things occurs for us in the future.
Okay. And because you are an expert in this field, you know, and Ustaz in this field, I would like to ask you the questions related to the main content of these du'as that are recited by the Muslims, especially the Shia ones all across the world. I mean, based on the du'as that we read, it is categorized into different categories, degrees and levels in terms of the value of the content. For example, when you look at the du'as that are recited by Imam Sajjad alayhi salam or the Aimma in general, you'll find really rich content, which are all in terms of, we can say in the sense of, that's right, it's tazarru, khushu, you know, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But sometimes among the public, for example, even the layali al-ghad, they supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the even most trivial points of the life. I mean, the smallest, mundane, materialistic ones. How to face dua in our life? I mean, what to recite in our du'as, Shaykh?
First of all, we should know that the best du'as are those du'as which are uttered by the best people.
Yes.
Which are said or which are, let's say, performed by the best people. For example, of course, if I ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based my own simple and limited knowledge, then of course, if I compare these things to what Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali alayhi salatu wasalam in his du'as, or Imam Sajjad alayhi tahiyyati wasalam in his du'as, Abu Abdullah in his du'as, that is not comparable, that is why it is really recommended that we should pray or we should recite the du'as that are narrated from the Ahlul Bayt.
Yes.
For example, in the Friday night, it is recommended to pray But if it is very much, it's very much good and better to pray, to recite the dua of Dua Kumail, for example.
Yes.
Or Dua Jawshan Kabir, for example, in these nights.
Yes.
So that is why...
Dua al-Iftitah.
Exactly.
In all the month of
all the
Ramadan.
du'as that are narrated
Okay.
in our traditional books.
Yes.
So in the morning of, for example, Friday, we should recite Dua al-Nutbah.
That's
So these du'as, or when you go, for example, to pay ziyarah to Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, recite ziyarah Jama'i Kabira.
very good.
And if you look at the translation of the text, you see that
Yes.
how beautiful it
Yes.
is, how meaningful it
Yes.
is, and how, let's say, beautifully the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam describe the Ahlul Bayt, their position, their status. So of course the best du'as are those du'a that are called du'a ma'thur.
Yes.
Ma'thur or du'as.
I wanted to ask about this concept. What is dua
Yes.
al-ma'thur? What does it
Yes.
mean exactly?
Yes, du'a ma'thur is those kind of du'as that are narrated from the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam. And the text is the exact text, phrases are exact phrases that are just narrated by the Ahlul Bayt. You cannot add anything, you cannot
Yes.
omit anything from this
Yes.
text. Just read this text and ask the
So
same
this gives
thing.
you a sense of authenticity to the dua?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly.
So even the wordings which are over there
Exactly.
and recited by the infallible imams are important in
Yes,
du'as.
of course.
That's
For
right.
example, look at dua of Imam Sajjad, dua Arafah.
Yes.
How much beautiful
Yes.
it is.
Also Imam
Look at
al-Hussein.
du'as of Imam Sajjad. Look at du'as of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Look
Yes.
at du'as of the Holy Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Very
All
good.
these du'as are the real meaningful du'as. They are very much rich in terms of content, and both in terms of form and the wordings of the word are really, really
Yes.
beautiful. You
That's
know?
right.
Of course, no one can say such du'as or can, let's say, compose such
Yes.
du'as. It is said that once someone, some of these scholars, great ulamas, gave the Sahifa al-Sajjadiyya to one of the Sunni Muslims in Egypt,
Yes.
one of the great Sunnite scholars. Once he studied and read these du'as, he told this alim that really, really we are deprived from these kind of beautiful du'as
Right.
that you have.
Yes.
It is the best, let's say, heritage of the Ahlul
Yes.
Bayt and legacy of the Ahlul Bayt that you
Okay.
have. That's why, alhamdulillah, thanks to the Ahlul Bayt, thanks to the
Yes.
narrators, may God bless all of them.
This is the legacy and the literature, I mean the rich
Yes.
literature of the Shiite ones, as if, for example, when you want to reach, for example, read a prose or a piece of literature, or for example, I don't know, go to a special period of the, literary schools of thought during the history of literature, you go to the best ones and you go to the masterpieces. In order to read out, the du'as and supplications, you have to first go to the best people of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth, namely the Ahlul Bayt. Okay, Shaykh, now a major question is about the fulfillment of our du'as. Are our du'as granted or answered or not? Sometimes we do du'a, they are not answered. Or for example, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a specific thing. And they are not granted to us, or they are not fulfilled. So how is the mechanism of dua working over here? If it is not going to be answered, why the people should do dua and supplicate to their Lord?
Mm. Yeah, first of all, as we talked about previously, that those specific conditions are required to be fulfilled while we asking dua. Like istighfar, like to be fully paid attention to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like to fully, for example, feel that you are dependent on Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Good deeds are required. Let's say the best, or the best possible knowledge about Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is required. Tawassul bi Ahlul Bayt alayhim salatu wasalam is required.
Yes.
Best du'as are required, but there are some impediments, or let's say barriers, obstacles that prevent us, the dua, to be accepted, to be answered by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is very much significant.
Yes.
Sometimes we do not pay attention to these things that they're like barriers for our du'as. For example, if we fill our stomach with haram things, unfortunately,
Haram mouth.
haram.
Yes, okay.
And with haram things, with haram food, with haram sustenance, none of the du'as will be accepted, will be answered. This is
so these are the preparations, you mean, and these are the grounds
in
in order to our dua be accepted, okay?
And then the other point that are mentioned in our riwayat is wilayah of Ahlul Bayt alayhi salatu wasalam, the one who denies and rejects this wilayah.
Or shows enmity towards them.
Exactly,
That's right.
exactly. This would be like a very bad kind of barrier for the du'as to be rewarded. And then if someone forget about, for example, Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar in his life, never perform this most important principle of Islam, and he's careless about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar, so of course his dua will not be answered according to the ayat. Zalim, the oppressor, the one who oppresses. You know, sometimes when we say oppressor, we think of, for example, the dictators, I don't know, for example, historical kind of oppressors in the history. But we forget that sometimes we might be ourselves among the great oppressors. Because of what? Because sometimes someone oppresses his own self.
Very good.
Sometimes someone oppresses children.
Yes.
His family members. His father, his mother, his parents, his wife, you know.
Very good.
These are also oppression. Oppression depends on what level you oppress. Sometimes when you oppress your children, it might be considered much worse than the oppress that Pharaoh committed against, for example, the people of Israel.
Very good.
So it depends that one who could oppress, if he oppresses, then of course his dua will not be accepted.
Yes.
If let's say, stay away from oppression, that would be good.
These are also among the etiquettes of the
Exactly. Also, qat' rahim.
Wow.
If you cut
Yes.
any kind of contact or communication with your relatives,
Your
with your
relatives,
parents,
right.
with your uncles, cousins, I don't know.
Yes. Tarkus salat also.
This kind of very bad effect. And also, if someone, for example, belittle the prayer, salat, do not care about salat.
Mocking religious content and religious values is also another thing.
If someone is careless about haqqun nas, this is also again one of the great
rights
barriers.
of the people must not be violated according to Islamic teachings.
These are the barriers of dua.
Wow.
You know, sometimes our dua is not answered because of these things.
So we get straight to the dua and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for our wantings and desires and wishes without being concerned about all these, preparations before that. That's right, okay. And for sure, the fulfillment of du'as and granting our answers to the du'as by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really a complicated mechanism. Of course, with all these preparations and with all these, we can say, preliminary facts, we have to still do du'a. We must not leave du'a. Because some people say, okay, Allah does not hear me, so let's leave du'a now.
You know,
we must not leave it.
According to some of the scholars, they very beautifully expresses this du'a, or prayed du'a. They say du'a is like a kind of mu'ashaqa. You know, du'a comes from ishq.
Okay.
When you love Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you refer to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You ask something from your beloved one, you know. So if such a thing is there between you and your Lord, then of course, ashiq, or the one who loves someone or something, of course he put forward some steps.
Yes.
You know, it is not just keep silent.
Being still and passive, inactive, no.
Do not act anything. That is why the one who loves Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he should perform something. He should put forward some steps.
Yes.
What is that? These are the things that he must be careful about Amr bil Ma'ruf and Nahy anil Munkar. He must be careful about sustenance. He must be careful about qat' rahim.
Yes.
He must be careful about prayer and salat. He must be careful about the rights of the people. You know, all these things, he must be careful. These are some steps that he put forward towards Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you put forward one step toward Allah, Allah will put 10 steps, 10 times more steps towards you. So these are the things that we should act, that we should do. And then inshallah our du'as will be answered and will be responded by our Lord inshallah ta'ala.
That's all right, very good, Shaykh. Really interesting topic. Still, although there are so many questions and details to this concept of dua, let's listen to an audio question sent to us live. Dear viewers, dear brothers and sisters, you are watching Thaqalain Talks. For more information, you can also visit our website, thaqalain-course.com. Let's listen to this audio question, then we'll get back to our discussion.
Assalamu alaikum, am I audible?
Assalamu alaikum, brother, crystal clear.
Thank you for having me. So I'm going to ask a question that might seem a little bit odd, but let me shoot anyway. So is there a time that we should not do dua, like when we did a lot of du'as and somehow somehow Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted to tell us that your dua isn't working that way, and maybe you should try something else, like trying more in order to achieve what you want instead of doing dua. So do we have cases that dua has no place in our life? Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, first of all, we can ask always from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiveness. We can be always in contact with Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, communicating through du'as with Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if sometimes we are, for example, in the status that we are 100% sure that it's not a good status for us to ask dua, for example.
Yes.
Like, for example, sometimes as these barriers and obstacles that we mentioned, if you're suffering from these things and you're 100% sure that you are not in a good mood now, in a good status now, so of course it's better to, first of all, to prepare yourself
Yes.
wholeheartedly and then go towards dua, for example. For example, if you belittle salat, so first go and say the prayer and do not do such a thing against namaz and against
Yes.
prayer,
Yes.
and then ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Or for example, when you cut any kind of relationship with your relatives, with parents, for example, alayadu billah, go and ask them, go and communicate them, go and talk to them,
Yes.
and then ask from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala some things, yeah? Or for example, sometimes if there are haqqun nas, rights of people, on your shoulder, then of course, first of all, try to give them back to the people, or at least ask their satisfaction.
Yes.
Once they're satisfied with you, then go to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are the things that we must be careful. Or for example,
Yes.
sometimes you're in the status of dhulm.
Yes.
You're just performing dhulm
Yes.
on your children, on your family members, on your friends, on your relatives, on your community. So first leave this, and then ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because in that status of dhulm, of oppression, of course, if you ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for sure you will not be responded.
Yes.
You will not be answered.
That's okay.
That is why, first we should remove these barriers, obstacles, and then ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
That's right. When you refer to the supplication and dua as a lovemaking with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it very much reminds me of this poem of Hafiz in Persian. I would like to read it out and translate it into English. You also can help me. I know you know literature better more than me. راهیست راه عشق که هیچش کناره نیست. The way of love towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has no rest place. آنجا جز آن که جان بسپارند چاره نیست. I mean, even if you die on this way, there is no better way than even you can die maybe in this way. هرگاه که دل به عشق دهی خوشدمی بود. در کار خیر حاجت هیچ استخاره نیست. In fact, whenever you fill your heart and soul with the love of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's a good time, and it's in the good time and doing a kar khair, in fact, a good deed, a blissful deed. There is no need to do consultation with others. So supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I mean, is really an outstanding thing. But Shaykh, sometimes these philosophers, I mean, ask questions and pose some ambiguities. For example, one of them is that when you do dua, you prefer your own desires to what Allah predestined for you. Did you get my question?
No, can you repeat?
When you do dua and supplicate for something from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you are preferring your own desired wishes rather than giving everything in the hands or leaving everything in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He has preferred the best for you. So what's your answer to that?
First of all, we do not know exactly that what is predestined by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us. No one knows. If someone claims that he already knows everything about his future, he is a great liar,
Okay.
So we don't know that.
Yes.
Then, if we don't know that, then of course we wish the best future. We
Yes.
wish prosperity for us. We want to be happy. We want to enjoy a happy life, a prosperous life, of course. So then, of course, our dua will also contribute to the establishment of that beautiful future for us.
Yes.
Okay?
Okay.
So if you ask something from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, of course you ask good things.
Yes.
No one asks bad things for himself or herself. Then Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves
Yes.
us more than our mother, more than our father, you know,
Yes.
then if you ask good things from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah wishes more than you, tons of times, millions of times,
Yes.
good things for you.
Uh-huh.
If you ask good things, then of course Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala
Right.
will accept. And no
That's
one
right.
go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask bad things.
Mhm.
You know, it is irrational. You know, it's something makes no sense. So that is why, of course, our du'as, since we ask good things from Almighty Allah
Yes.
subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is in line with iradatullah ta'ala, because Allah loves more,
Mhm.
even more than ourselves,
Yes.
us, because we're the creature of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Then of course, we do not know exactly what is predestined by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to us. We say that, oh Allah, please, for example, let us occur, for example, these beautiful things, good things in the future for us.
Okay.
This is not something that would be opposed to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for example, wants for us or wishes for us.
That's all right. This is why we are recommended to always ask for, the khairul umur, isn't it?
Exactly.
The best of the destinies or the fates. The best necessarily does not mean giving you this amount of money or this brand new car or this brand new house, isn't it? Sometimes there is no khair in that.
Yeah,
Maybe
of
there are
course.
so many obstacles, afflictions in the way
Yeah, that
for
is
you.
the best thing
Yes.
that we can ask from Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can say that, oh Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, please, please, give me all those things, or
Yes.
provide me with all those things that are the best thing for me, and you know best.
You know
You
best.
know, because sometimes عسى أن تحبوا شيئا وهو شر لكم وعسى أن تكرهوا شيئا وهو خير لكم.
Yes.
Sometimes we do not like something to happen for us, but in reality that's good.
Mhm.
Sometimes we do want something to happen for us, but in reality that's bad and evil for us.
Okay.
So that's why let Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decide the best thing for us, and we
Mhm.
should trust Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because He is the only trustworthy
Yes.
source that we can trust Him. So that is why, of course, as you rightly mentioned, we should ask the best things for ourselves from Almighty Allah subhanahu
Yes.
wa ta'ala, and leave it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
Yes.
Because He loves us, and He knows best that what are the good things
Mhm.
for us and what are the evil things for us.
That's all right. One of these Urafa has said that when you wake up in the early morning to do your salat, and whatever dua you are reciting and supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in line with all the duas that Imam As is doing. In the early morning and during the day, Imam As is also supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So only a soft breeze of the dua and supplication of Imam As will be tasted by you too. You are in the same line with Imam As. That's right. And what a blessing for the people who are living now. They're doing dua, and their Imam, who is passing life in major occultation, is doing dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Especially during the Layali al-Ghad and the holy month of Ramadan, as you said, Eid al-Fitr is also close to us 1 week from now. These are the best times in order to do dua. Okay? Shaykh, the world is full of atrocities and afflictions. We could see sad news are coming from around the world, here and there, the tragedies that are happening, the massacres, the genocide that is taking place all around the world, all these oppressions around the world. Can you read us or do us a dua, a good dua for such a world, to be recited or to be repeated now?
Yes, of course, we should ask Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, oh, may Allah enable us, first of all, ourselves, to be good, to be let's say, helpful, supportive, let's say, caring about each other,
Yes.
The more we care about each other, the more we are kind, the more we are, let's say, mercy to each other, for the more blessings of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala we will receive. And then we should ask that, oh Allah, please, fill this world with your mercy, with your rahmah.
Yes.
Then it requires that these kind of satanic powers that are committing crimes against humanity, and of
Yes.
course against you, when they commit crimes against your creature, they are committing crimes against you. So we ask you, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that inshallah,
Yes.
by your own, let's say, power, by your own, let's say, irada and will, please, let's say, save us
Yes.
against these, let's say, tyranny, against these kind
Yes.
of oppression, against these kind of oppressives and oppressors, particularly those oppressed innocent civilians, innocent children, innocent
Yes.
men and women who are being brutally killed,
Mhm.
massacred here and there.
Yes.
Oh Allah, please save them
Yes.
against those, let's say, oppressors and
Yes.
tyrant kind of figures in the history.
Thank you very much, Shaykh Rohani, for a nice elaboration regarding the concept of dua and supplication. And in my own wording, I think the best dua during these nights is Allahumma ajjal waliyik al-faraj. Allahumma ajjal waliyik al-faraj sahib al-zaman, inshallah. May Allah hasten the reappearance of Imam As, Ajjalallah, to taste a little bit of the world filled with justice. I mean, without oppression, without tyranny all around the world in his and under his government and leadership, inshallah. Thank you very much, Shaykh
You're
Rohani,
welcome.
for a nice elaboration on the concept of dua. It was very kind of a really fruitful discussion. I enjoyed a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, dear viewers, dear brothers and sisters, for watching the program Thaqalain Talks, coming to you by Noor Online Islamic Center. For more information, you can visit our website at thaqalain-course.com. Do not forget us in your du'as and supplications during Layali al-Ghad and the holy month of Ramadan. Till another episode, God bless you all. Fi aman.